You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
Welcome back to the Legacy Leaders podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is the founder of Levine LTC Benefits and long-term care planning expert, Raymond Levine. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. Well, we're excited to have you. This is such an important topic, and I'm so glad we can cover it for our listeners. But before we dive right in with all of our questions, I was hoping you would take just a few minutes and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you came to be an expert in this area.
I'll begin with a story about how I begat. And you're going to say, now, why is he bringing up the begatting? Is that my parents met at USC Law School in the 40s. And it was one of those times where especially women were not accepted to law schools. And so that's how they met and how I begat. And my mother was an estate planning attorney, and they were not insurance buyers. They were people who, bought whatever they needed. But in the early 70s, my mother bought a long-term care plan and then used it for 18 years. She died a couple of years ago at 103. I asked my mother, look, you're not insurance buyers. You never really, talk much about it. Why'd you do it? And she says, and she was very affluent, but she said, nobody has that much money to pay for caregiving and have a lifestyle. But it's been a gradual process. In my background, I've been in life insurance, I've been in a commercial bank, I've been in a number of financial planning situations. But then about 14, 15 years ago, actually even before that, my wife's parents both needed long-term, caregiving. And my wife said to me, we ought to get a plan. And I sort of looked into it. And eventually, not only did we get a plan, but eventually I said, gee, this is an interesting business. I should look into it. So I did. And so I've been involved in long-term care benefits for the last 14, 15 years. And it's given me a lot of personal experience about, people's lives, but also it's helped me of what things I need to do in my own personal life, to have not just caregiving policy, but a caregiving plan, a life plan, so that I can, my wife and I and my family, that we can live our lives without worrying about money or worrying about, where do we get care. But it's just been a gradual thing how eventually I got involved with long-term care planning.
So you were involved, you're interested in it because you've seen how it impacts the lives of your loved ones and how positive planning and preemptive planning can really positively impact even your own life. I love that. That's awesome.
Right. That's right.
Yes. And one of the things that we love about this podcast is I love asking the same question at the beginning of every podcast to find out. There's usually some sort of experience or story that really sparks people to be on the mission they're on and be in the industry they're in. So I love that is true for you as well. And I think it's great. So talk to our listeners a little bit about really the importance of understanding the scope and the importance of different caregiving services.
Well, let me begin by, how I think about planning is that, there are all kinds of, cliches about life is a journey, life is short, life is a lot of things. But, as time goes on, different stages of our lives when we're in our 20s and 30s, we're thinking about even before that, getting an education, then finding a job, finding an apartment. We have different steps in our lives. And then as we get older, then there's other things that start to happen to us. Sometimes, our friends get ill or they get sick. Our parents get ill or sick or they die, our friends die. There are a lot of transitions. So what I talk to people about about caregiving is it isn't just a long-term care insurance plan. It's part of, your life and your life planning, your estate planning, your financial planning. And if you don't have a plan, then what you've done is you're giving, you're self-planning, yourself, they call it self-insuring, self-funding. And it's not a really effective way to really plan your life. What you really do, sometimes you need legal services, you need a wealth advisor or financial planner, to help you in this journey. Now, I'm old enough, I remember the Rand McNally maps. That's how you got, and you ask people at the gas station. People don't do that
Right.
anymore. But now we have GPS, and that gives us to where we want most of the time. So what you need is you need a plan. You need to think about, where am I going next? Not just today, but where I'm going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Because what I've learned in this business is, it isn't just learning about the policies, it's also learning about people and what they're going through in their lives or how they're thinking about things. Most of us, we think of spur of the moment. What do we want to do? What are we going to have for dinner? What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do this weekend? We're going to take a vacation. And those are fun things. And with regret, the things that I do are not necessarily fun, but they're really necessary. They're really necessary. And if you don't have your GPS, or if you don't know where you're going, you'll get someplace, but it may not be where you want to go.
Right. No, I agree with that. And that is great wisdom, not just for planning, but for life in general. So thank you for sharing that with us. So talk to our listeners a little bit about when they're thinking about creating this sustainable financial plan for care. What are some of the things they need to take in consideration that they may not realize? And what are some of the things in your experience that they might want to avoid?
Well, it depends on where they're coming from. Have they been referred to me? Have they been in some caregiving event? Have they been advised by, an attorney, an accountant, financial planner, wealth advisor? At what stage are they coming to me? And what's their interest level? One of the things, let me just is that what I do is not immediate. There's no immediate gratification. It might be something that you might not need for 10 or 15 years or whatever, but probably you will. And so these are things you got to plan in advance. But where they're coming from are, a personal event, or they come from somebody that recommends, or sometimes, actually people that I am most interested also to talk to are what I call the unconscious. And the unconscious are people that they should be talking about it, but they don't think it's necessary. They don't think it's important. They're not aware. And what I'll say to people is, even if you don't want to talk to me now, here's my suggestion is, look around you. When you go anywhere, unless, you're only with people who are young, you're going to see somebody that has some mobility issues. It's knowing what to look for and to be aware. So, in answer to your question, it depends where they come from, to where, to what questions I ask. I might ask, what makes you want to talk to me? What is it about, what do you know about caregiving planning? Do you know anybody that's been involved with caregiving? How do you plan for the future? What kind of estate planning have you done? What kind of financial plan? So, I just ask empathetic questions to get them to tell. I want to know their story. Because, there might be, if they're really not interested or they really don't care, then there's nothing. It's like going to the doctor and saying, heal me, or what's wrong with me. They're going to ask you a question. They're going to want to do tests. So that's how I begin the conversation is, tell me your story and let me listen, and let me see if there are things that you are saying where I can provide help, not just with an insurance plan, but insurance plan or benefit plan, caregiving plan that also connects with your life plan, your estate plan, and your wealth.
That is
That's
great wisdom. I've taken all the questions so far, Stan. I will be quiet now and let you have a turn.
no, this is great. I was going to say that sounds like exactly the same process we use in an estate planning process. And of course, estate planning includes this issue, right? This issue of how do I pay for long-term care? So I am intensely interested in this subject, and I'm dying to get some answers to very specific questions I have, which really relate to how do you look at the role of long-term care insurance as part of the planning process? Who is long-term care insurance appropriate for? who is it not appropriate for? And I guess throwing another question into the blender, as I understand it, there's been a real shift in the nature of long-term care insurance over the last several years, pivoting away from, as I understand it, and this is where, I'm really interested to get your take on this, because the story I've been getting from people is that pure long-term care insurance is going by the wayside and is being replaced with insurance products that have long-term care riders, things like life insurance, annuity products with riders, because apparently the insurance industry at one point didn't do the best job of underwriting, and they got themselves in financial trouble because it turns out that the cost of long-term care and the number of people that need it was greater than they had actuarially anticipated. And so I guess that's a somewhat disjumbled, disorganized way of asking, how do you talk to people about long-term care insurance? What are the products, and who is it a fit for? Who is it not a fit for?
You are correct that, long-term care insurance has been around, I don't know, 35, 40 years, and it's evolved. And just like in estate planning or financial planning, the way you did things 40 years ago is not the same way you're going to do, in 2025. And all the things you asked, we don't have an hour and a half for me to give you my wisdom or my, to answer all of them. But let me just summarize that 20 years ago, there were maybe 100 companies that were offering long-term care plans, sort of like, in the 80s when, you had the banks that were doing real estate. They're all doing all these real estate deals. And then the real estate industry went bust, and sort of a lot of banks. Well, what happened with the long-term care companies is that they had certain actuarial ideas, and they were wrong. They were wrong because interest rates, especially after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, 2010, that interest rates went up, or went down. And so that hurt their earnings. The other thing is that it had to do with, and I was going to actually talk about that, it's about health assessment, is that they weren't as stringent about health assessment. Again, it's like, when people did loans, they didn't do due diligence with home loans. They just packaged it and sold it. So they weren't as stringent with health assessment, which they're more stringent about now. The other thing that was important is that they thought in the same terms of life insurance. They said, if somebody buys, let's say you buy a $2 million policy and you're in your 30s or 40s and you have a family, and then, you're in your 50s and you say, well, look, the kids have left and, I've got a pension plan or whatever assets, so I'll drop my policy. So that's how they sort of were thinking about it. What they didn't expect, and with those expectations, they didn't realize people, once they had it, they said, I'm not giving this thing up. So the lapse rate was very low. And the health assessment. Or the other thing they got is that they expected people to die sooner, not use it as long. But then they found that people were using it not just 2 years, but 3, 4, or 5, depending on how long they had the policies. They said, my mother had a lifetime policy. She used hers for 18 years. And she wasn't happy about the premium, but but she bought it later in life. But she got back everything, the premium that she paid in, and a lot more. So that has been, and influencers, writers, people who've talked about it, have been negative about long-term care plans because for all the things that you said, premiums have gone up, health assessment. So the insurance company has progressed. Insurance companies, they do good things and they do things that exasperate me. I mean, they really do. But what they have done is, you have more flexible plans. Health assessment is also, and the way that they do it is becoming more efficient. Artificial intelligence, there are things which I have access to that I can help people to know more about their health assessment. So really 3 things. And what is health assessment? What's your health? Because even if, no matter what kind of plan, unless you're in a company and you're assured to get some level of long-term care, there's usually some level of health assessment. And if you're unhappy about saying, well, I don't want to do health assessment, is that when you apply for a credit card, when you apply for any kind of credit, now it may go through an algorithm, but there's somebody that's going to evaluate your credit to see, how you're paying. So it's the same, people get more annoyed about health assessment than they do with all the credit cards and car loans and but people do. So it has to do with your health. What's the state of your health? And in some states, you can have pretty lousy health, and I can still get you a plan. In fact, I can get you a plan for your home for $95 a month. It's a basic home care plan, and you don't need any kind of health. You don't need any kind of anything other than to pay the $95. And there's some states that also have short-term care plans. Not all states, and I have an annoyance about that, especially, Washington, Oregon, California, other states that don't have short-term care plans. And they're very good plans. They're comprehensive, and the premiums are reasonable. And also the health assessment isn't as stringent as, a traditional or a hybrid plan. And so why every state doesn't offer it, I don't know, because then they complain about Medicaid or, social services. So those are things that I don't understand, and I'm exasperated about, and I've asked, and I get a lot of answers or a lot of looks. But the second is just as when you go to a financial advisor, wealth advisor, estate planning, is you got to have an estate. You got to have something. And so it's the same with, thinking about caregiving, but you've got to have some disposable income. I can work with, little, or I can work with a lot, and I will design a plan that, fits as best we can what you want to accomplish. It doesn't need to do, cover 100% of your caregiving expense. Even if it does 40 or 50 or 60%, and then you want to fund the other 40% with your disposable income, or if you have assets to sell, you can do that. So I don't advise, one size, oh, you all have to do that. They used to sort of do that when years ago. They say, it's this amount and this amount. They were on a template. But I think, some are still on that. I like to think I'm much more flexible. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, or I'm going to give you ideas of how to think about it. And I'm not going to give you, the paradox choice. The paradox choice, I'm not going to give you, 7 things to think about. Two or three is good enough. And then if you really go ahead, Stan.
Well, I was going to say you mentioned something that I think I've heard from other people, which is that ideally you should structure the insurance component of a long-term care plan to integrate with the income that you're going to have, either from dividend investments or Social Security or other retirement accounts, so that the two added together, that is the income you can count on without working, plus the insurance benefit when added together, give you the benefit you need to pay for the cost of care without having to deplete assets. Is that a common thought process in doing this work?
It's a way of thinking about it. However,
Well, if you have another way to think about it, I'm open to that.
Okay,
That's what I want to hear about.
here's an example. You may think everybody always thinks they have enough money to do everything they want to do. However, when you take your car in for maintenance and then the service representative calls you, oh, by the way, your transmission, or you're gonna need this. How much is it gonna cost? $2,000 or $1,500. You could, your original thinking is, oh, what's the problem? Well, the thing is, it disrupts your thinking about it, and it may disrupt your cash flow, because maybe you're just getting by. Maybe you do have disposable income. Look, I can even think, do you have even $1,500 left in your credit line, for your credit card? I mean, eventually these are the things that you have to come to terms with, and that, and you cringe. I mean, I don't worry about it as much anymore about my car, because I bring it in enough that, hopefully it isn't some real problem. But the thing is, supposing, with caregiving, they all say it's expensive. What they always don't know is, how expensive it is. And so let's say your monthly income is $8,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $15,000, $20,000 a month. How are you living? Are you spending 20,000? Are you only living on 10? Well, then if you're living on 10 and then you need 7 or 8,000 for your caregiving, now that's 17, maybe now you have 3,000, or you don't, but it's an expense. It's an expense, and it's an expensive expense. And so if you haven't thought about how to, we don't have warranties in our life. We have to buy the warranty. Think of, caregiving as a warranty plan, just as you have, on your appliances or your car. So think of it as a warranty expense. If there's something happens with your body, here's the warranty. I mean, health insurance is sort of like that too. They call it insurance, but you can call it, it's warranty insurance. Make sure that you can pay for your expenses. Now, unless you're Charlie Munger, I heard a interview where he was saying he didn't own home insurance. He said, it isn't worth it. But he was a multi-billionaire. So if his home, something happens to his home, but for most of us, we need to have insurance in order to pay for expenses that even if we don't want to do it, we'll do it. Now, here's the opposite. You don't own a long-term care plan, don't have any kind of plan. And so if you have kids, now they're part of the plan. They're the people that are going to be helping you. They're going to have to. And there's an expense to that. You really think that if your kids or your spouse or your friends, if they're helping you out, there's an expense. They got to drive over, they're helping you, they're driving you to the doctor or other errands, or you're out at a social event, or if your family or friends, people you need, have to fly in or drive in, there's an expense. I mean, the gas station or the electrical company, if you have an electrical vehicle, is say, oh, you're a caregiver, it's for free. There's a charge for it. So if you think that your cash flow, your lifestyle isn't going to be affected, if somebody needs care, it's going to be affected.
Okay, so just a quick question.
Sure.
The insurance products that you typically place, are they typically a long-term care product, or are they a long-term care rider to some other financial product? Which is the more common scenario for you?
Well, again, it depends on, their health. It depends on their financial suitability. And I will show them, a variety of plans. And and just because it's a product doesn't mean that the product is right for you. Look, a sports car may seem wonderful, but at my age, getting in and out of a sports car isn't so easy. Plus I like more space. It's just, but if you want the sports car, we'll talk about the sports car. If you want a utility vehicle, we'll talk about a utility vehicle. However, in workplace plans, most of them are life insurance that have a life insurance rider to it. And they can be very good plans, but sometimes there are nuances to it. About insurance is an interesting thing, is that now you think you can just buy it on the internet, and you can. The downside is that if you buy something, you have a policy and there are rules to it. Thing is, nobody ever reads the policy. They just say, it has this. But then when, you file for a claim, they say, oh, it isn't part of the policy. And then they get mad at the insurance company. They can't get mad at, me, because I didn't sell it to them. But they'll get mad at the insurance company. Wow, they don't want to pay. Well, because you bought something, but you didn't understand what you were buying. So that's the reason, to talk to me or have the conversation with me or somebody else, or with financial planning, is it talk to somebody that you trust and has the knowledge, to give their opinion. You don't have to accept my opinion, but I will tell you the facts, because I attend, webinars all the time. I have continuing education. So I am knowledgeable about this stuff. Now, I will also admit too, I also have, opinions. I have biases about it, of what I think somebody should do and why. And if they accept it, fine. But if they say, look, I really want to do this, I'll say, I'm not opposed to you doing it, but I will also, if you become a client of mine, if you buy a plan from me, I will summarize it, keep it in a folder, or digitize it, and look at it every once in a while. Because this is one of the other things that happens in insurance, whether it's caregiving or look at your plans every once in a while, or talk to your agent and say, review my plan. What's covered? I'm sure, with the Palisades and Altadena fire, a lot of people that didn't have, they called and said, what's my plan? And it should be the same as what you do as attorneys, what you do as wealth plan, is that you got to check in every once in a while, see if the tires are pressured, see if there's oil in the crankshaft, ask somebody, what do I have my plan? Do I need, is it good enough? Do I need to update the plan, just like you do in estate planning? It isn't static. Things change. Either be proactive as I'm proactive with my clients, but I also am glad when I have clients or people call and say, look, I want to get a checkup. I don't necessarily want something. I just want to know that I'm okay. And the other thing I will say is that in whatever plans you have, digitize it or have it in a manual folder where you can find things. One of the biggest mistakes people do is they may have a plan, but nobody knows where it is and they didn't tell anybody.
Yes, we see that in the estate planning world as well. And there's nothing more tragic than someone going through the process of creating a plan and doing this work and paying for it, and then not doing that final simple step of letting other people know where to find this plan, and then, find walking probate and all of these different things that come with the estate planning world with no plan. And then later they're cleaning out mom or dad's house and they find that there was an estate plan all along. So I feel like this type of planning, the important part is do the plan and then make sure your loved ones know what the plan is, have that conversation, make sure they know where to find all of the information. So that is great advice, Raymond, for sure. All right. Is there anything, before we run out of time, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
It's just, that I emphasize about whether you're unconscious about it or you are conscious about it. If you know somebody that has been or will be in a caregiving situation, ask yourself, well, if that happens to them and they have these issues, what should I do? What should I think about? Who should I talk to? Now, if you have an accountant, you have a wealth advisor, you have an attorney, you have your brother-in-law who knows everything, or the sister-in-law that knows everything, whoever it is, ask them, say, look, I've got the situation, what are you doing? What do you think? What are you thinking about? And I would encourage people, whether you're near a situation, of a situation, or unconscious of a situation, is have the conversation, talk to people that have the experience and the knowledge to say, what do you think about this? What do you know about this? What's your opinion?
That's great and absolutely great advice. Well, thank you so much for everyone for listening. This has been the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. And our guest today was Raymond Levine. And to connect with Raymond, you can find him at Lavine LTC INS.com or LinkedIn. You can also find him on Facebook. And we will link all of those for you in the show notes to make it nice and easy to find Raymond. This was a lot of great information that applies to a lot of our listeners. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us.
Thank you. I welcome this podcast, and good afternoon to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.